Good morning, MIDers. Good morning to everyone. Hello, Nadia. Oh, it's so lovely to see familiar faces, friendly faces, beautiful faces. So, I'm Rabbi Jessica Yarkin. You may remember me from 6 years of MID. I was asked to sub today, and it's, of course, there's a famous saying, you don't say no to Susie Katz, or at least that's my personal philosophy. So, of course, I also leapt at the chance to get the chance to be in a room with everyone again. So, I'm so glad. It's so lovely. The last time I taught MID, we were just virtual. So it's lovely just to confirm that we all still have legs, even though maybe some of our knees and hips are a little bit older and sorer. I can't properly bend down anymore either because of carrying big, chunky children around all the time. They're fine, by the way, thanks for asking. And yes, it's such a delight to be back. One of the things that a bunch of you already have asked me is, what are you going to teach today? What are we learning about? And I've responded with, that's a good question. I have prepared something, but here's the irony. We're going to look at the centrality of the question in Judaism. So we're looking at questions. So I wanted it to be a bit of a mystery, because then it would be a question in your heads. Because why and what and how and where are, I think, sometimes even more important than the answer in Judaism. We're also going to kind of start with a bit of Pesach and end with a bit of Sukkot and Shavuot, if we're lucky. So we'll kind of tie in that period we're in right now, the Omer, because I think questioning is actually central to both Pesach and Shavuot. I actually realize we probably won't get to Sukkot, and that's fine. You'll invite me back closer to Sukkot. So, and also hello to anyone watching on YouTube, and I'm so sorry that I didn't think to send source sheets to Susie or Rosalie so that they could email it to anyone else. If you want a copy of the stuff after class, we can absolutely do that. We're going to start with a non-Jewish text, but it's one of my favorites. It is a, surprise, surprise, science fiction British text. It is Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Hands up if you've ever heard of that. Hands up if the number 42 is a shock. Has any meaning? That's fine, we're going to get there. So, this is actually a 2-page skit that is going to set the stage for what we're then going to discuss. And again, just because I haven't been here live in the past, tell me how this would best happen. We can pass source sheets out. Would you mind, actually? Would you be okay just passing some back? Jim, you could grab some and help those people. I'd love to I'm happy to do it, but I'd also love other voices. Would someone volunteer to potentially take the mic and read these scintillating 2 pages? Someone who has a loud, clear voice, who doesn't mind also being on YouTube. I should have enough for everyone. They should be coming round. I printed about 22 copies for some reason. And I've actually got an extra one here. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, there should be enough for everyone. Sure, Rosalie, you can read this. Yeah, there's a few there being disseminated, so we're going to get to it right now.
Do you want to use this one, or you want me to hold on?
So we're basically at page 1, and just enjoy this. It's set in a different time.
Okay, so you want me to start? All right, it starts, the title is The Ultimate Answer to Life, the Universe, and Everything. O deep thought computer, he said, the task we have designed you to perform is this. We want you to tell us, he paused, the answer. The answer, said Deep Thought. The answer to what? Life, urged Fook. The universe, said Lunkwell. Everything, they said in chorus. Deep Thought paused for a moment's reflection. Tricky, he said finally. But can you do it? Again, a significant pause. Yes, said Deep Thought. I can do it. There is an answer, said Fuchs with breathless excitement. Yes, said Deep Thought. Life, the universe, and everything. There is an answer, but I'll have to think about it. Fuchs glanced impatiently at his watch. How long? He said. 7.5 million years, said Deep Thought. Lunkwill and Fuchs blinked at each other. 7.5 million years? They cried in chorus. Yes, declaimed Deep Thought. I said I'd have to think about it, didn't I? 7.5 million years later, Fuchs and Lunkwill are long gone, but their descendants continue what they started. We are the ones who will hear, said, how do you pronounce it? Fong? Listen, Rabbi, how do you pronounce it? Said Fong.
That's totally fine. It's a, alien name, so Fong is...
Fong. The answer to the great question of life. The universe, said Lunkwill, and everything. Shh, said Lunkwill with a slight gesture. I think Deep Thought is preparing to speak. There was a expectant pause while panels slowly came to life on the front of the console. Lights flashed on and off experimentally and settled down into a business-like pattern. A soft, low hum came from the communication channel. Good morning, said Deep Thong at last. Good morning. Oh, Deep Thought, said Lunkwill nervously. Do you have, that is, an answer for you? Interrupted Deep Thought majestically. Yes, I have. The two men shivered with expectancy. Their waiting had not been in vain. There really is one, breathed Fong. There really is one, confirmed Deep Thought, to everything, to the great question of life, the universe, and everything. Yes. Both of the men had been trained for this moment. Their lives had been a preparation for it. They had been selected at birth as those who would witness the answer. But even so, they found themselves gasping and squirming like excited children. And you're ready to give it to us? Urged Lunkwill. I am. Now? Now, said Deep Thought. Though I don't think you're going to like it. Doesn't matter, said Fung. We must know it now. Now? Inquired Deep Thought. Yes, now. All right, said the computer, and settled into silence again. The two men fidgeted. The tension was unbearable. The answer to the great question, yes, of life, the universe, and everything, said Deep Thought. Yes, is, said Deep Thought and paused. Yes, is, yes. 42, said Deep Thought, with infinite majesty and calm. It was a long time before anyone spoke. 42, yelled Lunkwill. Is that all you've got to show for 7.5 million years' work? I checked it very thoroughly, said the computer, and that quite definitely is the answer. I think the problem, to be quite honest with you, is that you've never actually known what the question is. See, my 42 is Jackie Robinson. That was his number.
Right.
For a baseball fan.
Thank you, Rosie, for reading a very long and important source there. I hope everyone was able to kind of just dive straight into that beautiful picture created there by Douglas Adams of alien beings who wanted to find out the answer, the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. And they build a supercomputer called Deep Thought, who thinks deeply about the question and finally comes up with the answer. And it's the biggest anticlimax of all time, 42. And he raises the point, you never really knew what the question was. What's the question? And the rest of the book, the rest of the radio series, in some ways, tries to then find out what the question is, because they don't know what the ultimate question could be. But this narrative, to me, as hopefully it does to you. And if you have any thoughts, reflections, questions, yay, just illustrates such a Jewish principle that the answer, not always that fun, sometimes even irrelevant. The joy is in the questioning and in trying to figure out what the question is. And also that there are some things that it's just impossible to even answer because it's not known. Because what is the ultimate answer to life? It's going to be different for every individual. What does the universe mean? We still don't know, and we're trying to find out. And our life's purpose is to figure out the mechanics of the universe, the why of creation, and then to live in the how. And our Jewish texts really, really struggle with the how. That's the Mishnah, that's even the Torah. So, with just that framing in mind, the beautiful idea of we need to figure out what the question is, and the answers don't always matter as much, we're going to have a look at some Jewish texts, and we'll start with Pesach. I should have gotten people to hand out the second sources while we were doing the first, because we're now going to have a little brief pause while we hand out our second sources. It's going to be page 3, and it's going to start with Ma Nish Tana. So I'll divide this into 3 little sections, so we can go gluk, gluk, gluk. And just to save a little time, I'll start to read it now. So even if you don't have the sheet, that's fine. Also, if you can stifle your curiosity, don't read ahead so that we can kind of do this together. Otherwise, you're getting the answers before anyone else. And the whole point of this is to stay in the question. Do you have a sheet? There might be a spare 1 or 2 still from the other sides. Yeah, I think I just printed out enough. I know, it's like when you get given a text, it's human nature, but especially Jewish human nature, to skim and to digest and read and think, and then our minds go buzz, 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 buzz. So, the sages taught, and this is from the Gemara, and this is again in response to the Manish Tana, the whole, how do we open our Seder? If his son is wise and knows how to inquire, then his son asks him, i.e. the leader of our Seder. So hopefully there is a wise son in the room who will then start to talk about, why is this night different than all others? If he is not wise, so if your child isn't capable of asking, the wife is allowed and meant to ask the Seder leader, the husband, the 4 questions. And if his wife is not capable of asking, or if he has no wife, because again, there's a lot of assumptions going on, he asks himself. So and this, by the way, was a really relevant piece during COVID, whereby some of us were literally alone on Passover. And I hope that people knew that you were allowed to do a Seder by yourself, and that you got to be a crazy person and ask yourself the Manish Tana. So I hope some of you engaged upon that. I'm sure Peter Levitan knew to do that. So, and even if there are 2 Torah scholars there, Chachamim, very Talmidei Chachamim, really smart Torah scholars who know all the laws, all the halachot of Pesach, if they're sitting together and there's no one else present to ask them questions, they ask each other. Now the shock there is, well, obviously they know the answer, so why bother to ask? So again, I hope this text makes sense. We start off with, hopefully, a child who is clever but actually needs to know the answers. Really, that's the best person to be given the task of questioning. And if that person isn't there, great. Find a woman. Again, we're talking Talmud times, different standards, but let's talk for a second about how lovely it is that it's therefore a requirement for a woman to be present at the Seder, and that she is allowed the task of asking Manish Tana if they don't have a kid. That's great. It's not just like a mitzvah that only the men should have. If there are no women, children there, if you're alone, you still have to ask. And if there's two of you and you both know, you still have to ask. So my funny question is, why? Just any thoughts or reflections on the importance of this text? Lana and Joe.
I find it interesting every year. We cover the same text every single year. We think we know it, but there's always something that comes up that we have to ask a question about.
Yes. Did everyone hear that? Every year, as you said, it's the same text, but maybe we find a new question or a new way of framing it. And even if it's the same, there's just emotional attachment to those questions, and we want to lean back into them. It's this Gemara just is so exciting to me because it centralizes the importance of the question. And we'll, in a little bit later, in some sources, some spicy sources, because Jessica likes spicy sources, we're just going to see why questions can be so important to society and to our mental health. But yes, if you think about it, do other religions have a centralized holiday? You know, you think about a Christian holiday, whereby it's of supreme importance that people question themselves, one another, that we engage in this discussion, in this openness, in finding differences. I think Christmas, Easter, and I'm not knocking Christianity at all, but again, it's our bigger religion that most of our neighbors are, or Islam, or Hinduism. There just isn't that. It's incredible. It's really incredible, and we take it for granted, those of us who were raised in a Jewish household. And I think for people who convert into Judaism, it's one of the most attractive reasons for them. And when I've worked with converts, I've often found when I ask them, what was attractive to being Jewish? Why did you want to do this? It's a really hard religion. Are you crazy? I often give many things to not be Jewish. And they often say, I love that you get to question. I love that there's a very open-endedness when it comes to God. And I love the struggle we have and that there are many answers and more answers than questions. Just because we've got a lot of wonderful sources to get through, I'll take a question or even a comment and then we'll plow through.
I have often used that particular saying on various occasions during the year. When something comes up that is the same as it always is, I ask, Manishtana halayla hazeh.
I love that the Manishtana itself becomes this standard of like, Manishtana, thank you, that's brilliant, it's perfect. So the next little line that I wanted to add, because that's from the Gemara, and the Gemara is famous for question, 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 I just wanted to also remind us of the Mishnah, which preceded the Gemara. You know, this is, again, I know as MIDers, particularly I don't see any new timers here. You're familiar with the Mishnah, the Gemara, Mishnah being the first massive major texts that takes on the project that interprets the Torah. So the Mishnah is such a big book, and beginnings are often quite important. And quite famously, the Mishnah opens not with, why does the Torah exist, or here's our purpose, or anything else, but it opens with a question. And it doesn't necessarily even matter what the question is, but it's stunning that the Mishnah opens with a very tachlis kind of question, which is the very famous Me'e matai korin et Shema be'aravit. From, when maybe we begin to recite the Shema in the evening. We just jump straight into Jewish practice. And then there's, of course, a long discussion, and then there's questions, questions, questions. But there's no prologue or intro or preamble. It's just a beautiful thing that one of our biggest, most important halachic authorities that started to shape Judaism starts with a question. And then let's jump a little bit to 12th century. We have the huge, it's Bamidbar Rabbah, but the idea of Midrash Rabbah itself are Midrashim, stories, sayings compiled, external material from the Torah, and Bamidbar references the book that this is talking about. So, I'm going to read this one out to you as well because it's awesome. Kashem sheyayin cheshbono shivim, kach yesh shivim panim b'Torah. Just like the numerical equivalent of wine is 70, so too there are 70 faces to the Torah. Now, we could talk about why wine and Torah are equivalent and why it's really nice that the rabbis say, you know what, yayin, if you add those up, that equals 70. But what I really want to look at is 70 faces to Torah. Has anyone heard that saying before? I'm so glad I came today because it's seriously, thank you, Lana. It is one of my favorite texts, which unfortunately not every Jewish person or Jewish professional remembers. Let's interpret it. What does it mean to you? There are 70 faces to the Torah. And this is Torah, capital T as well, like the Torah. Ooh, thank you. Yes, we're having echoes. Where 70 is a big number. It's often a number of completion because it's 7, which is like the 7 days of Shabbat, but then you like times 10. So the 70 nations was in the rabbis' count. How many nations are in the world? So, and if there are 70 nations, maybe there's a face for every nation. So it could be that we're actually saying the Torah should be accessible and meaningful to every single nation. But every single nation is different as well. So and again, we're not sure that the text means that, but I love the biblical echo that you just did, because for the rabbis, they're using this numerical value system. So 70, they're probably aware and conscious of the fact that there are 70 nations. So, because they could have said there's 52, or they should have said there are 42, right? There are 42 faces of Torah, which is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. But they say there are 70 faces. That's true, exactly. 7 is, again, very, very special number here. So yeah, it reminds us, potentially, or it just could be this is a big number, 70 faces of Torah. What does that say to us about Torah? Jim? Yes, if you live to 70, you're great. You know that was a long life when you were a rabbi in the 10th century and earlier and later. So we could be saying, so again, if you take it in a slightly literary way, it could be every year of your life you get to see a different face of the Torah, which comes around to our questions, that every year those questions are always the same, but we are the ones who change, so the answer might change. Every year we're doing the same thing, but the Seder doesn't mean the same to you when you're 10 as when you're 50. And you've gone through all these life changes, and your family looks different, and you might be in a different place. So it might be that it's anew every single year. So 70 could be a kind of clue there that says to us, keep studying Torah, because every year of your life you will get to see a different face, a different expression, a different meaning of Torah. So again, well done for knowing that 70 in Judaism is a heavy number. Politically, or even theologically, what is it to claim that the rabbis claim there are 70 faces to the Torah? Joette, please. Great assembly. Oh, that's right, the 70 elders between Joshua and the later rabbis. And I do believe that there's meant to be 70 members of the Sanhedrin, right, of the judges, 70 major leaders. That would therefore give us that at any one time, even in the same day, there could be 70 different interpretations of the Torah based on the leader. Because leader number 5 is going to say, this is what I see. And leader number 20 is going to be like, no, you need to do it this way. Or here's a different interpretation. Here's a different face that I see. So again, we could be saying, for the leaders, don't you dare be arrogant and think there's only one answer. Because there's 70 different ways, 70 different visions and views, 70 opinions, again, based on the wholeness of your society, of the people who are in charge and who are wise. Rosie. Yes. Again, the 42 is that's the Douglas Adams' answer. So 42 is special to people who are into science fiction, and then 70 both divisible by 7 because 7 times 9, 6. Wow. I'm reverse, yeah. That's why I'm a rabbi, not a mathematician, but yeah, 7 times 6 is 42. That's true. But yeah, no, so there isn't really a connection between 42 and then the 70 faces of the Torah, but you know, it's a big number because it could have said there are 2 faces of the Torah or there are 20 or whatever. And again, I think that the rabbis chose 70, possibly with the nations in mind, or with that's the age of a person, or again, that's how many elders there were in the Sanhedrin, or again, just the idea of a huge amount of people. Yeah, 100%. That every year we're a different person. Also, our face looks different every year. So it's like, but the Torah ages and changes. And differently beautiful and better and more fun colors in our hair. Susie. Ooh. Thank you, Cecil. I'm so glad that you're with us in virtual space because I love you so much. And I love that comment. And thank you, Susie, for being our online manager. Yes, sure. King David, it was said, had 70 years of lifespan. And again, he is the king, as that the ultimate Jewish male hero, was someone who lived that way and was also quite known for being not as wise as Solomon, but a very good king. I think we've possibly exhausted this in terms of what 70 might mean because we've already had such a spectrum of wonderful possibilities. But the questions, the options, are actually more exciting than any potential answer. But what this source does to us is it destabilizes any interpretation. Meaning that if you're in a room and you're having an argument with someone, like a halakhic argument, what does this verse mean? You know, how do I keep kosher? What did God mean by honor the Sabbath? If in every line you get to remember there are 70 faces to this, that probably means there are 70 solutions, 70 interpretations, 70 different ways to read the lines. Because the Torah has 70 faces. For the different nations to interpret from yourself when you're growing, and you yourself will see 70 different things in your story. And again, for us people who go to shul often and who might hear a sermon again and again and again, or at least who have to read those Torah portions every week, or if you're like a regular prayer and you're having to read the Shema again and again and again and again. It's good. It means it never runs dry. It shouldn't be boring. Because even though the text is the same, you get to have 70 different options because it's all about the questioning. So to me, it's just such an important, powerful text that also goes up against fundamentalism. Don't be arrogant. There's no one answer to this. There are 70. So what are you here to show me, Chabad? Our sages point to the parallel that the Hebrew words yayin, or wine, and sod, secret, also has the gematria of 70. Nachon. And I actually think that is an explicit reference here. Yeah, no, I'll read that again. No worries, darling. I should double check my phone's on silence. Yes. We just heard that not only does yayin, wine, have the numerical value of 70, but the word sod, or secret, also has the numerical value of 70. Again, we can apply that the Torah, it's secretive, meaning we don't know the answer. That's what a secret is. We're not sure. It's a mystery. The Torah is mysterious. There are 70 possible versions of it. And again, we'll just briefly tie it into joy, because we're saying also that wine is like Torah, meaning Torah is joyful. Torah is sweet, it's a blessing. Wine is so positive in Judaism. So that's a beautiful thing as well. And it's all part of it. It's a joy to get to study again and again and for it to be open. So yeah, it's such a core understanding of what Torah is, that we're all about the questions and the interpretations and the possibilities. Please, Melinda. Right, that it's like you're born again at 70. I remember Zisel had a bar mitzvah at a certain age. And that's because 100%, it's like you've lived a whole life then. So yeah, it's the summation of a human's experience. So the next source, actually, Bridget, did you have a comment? I just tried to be specific there. Thank you, Bridget. So yes. Oh, sure. I was just a bit silly, but I wanted to talk about, because I don't have an approximate date of Bar Mitzvah Rabbah, compiled approximately 12th century lunchtime. That's what I said it. Yeah, no, I was just reading that out aloud. So I assume that it was over lunch when they had a nice glass of wine. So the next source is also from the Talmud. And I'm going to have a look if we have time to really go deeply into it. Possibly, possibly not, because these are great questions. Like this was Ed Feinstein's holy, like Yom Kippur sermon. He spent 1 year in 1993, which is amazing. That was his high holiday sermon, was this text. It's so deep and powerful, we could spend a whole hour on it. And this is from Talmud Shabbat 31a. Even after death, the questions don't stop, right? So as Jews, we actually believe that in the afterlife, you don't get a rest. We're still focused on questions. And here, the rabbis imagine, Rava, one of the biggest hitting rabbis, decides to teach this text. After departing from this world, when a person is brought to judgment for the life lived in this world, the heavenly court, really God, potentially God's angels, God's messengers, or again, as Rabbi Feinstein taught, God personally asks us, to the person who has passed on at the pearly gates. Here are some questions. Did you conduct business faithfully? Are you faithful in business? Did you find the time for Torah? Did you invest yourself in family? Did you keep hope alive? Did you engage deeply in matters of wisdom? Did you learn critically? What do we make of that? Is everyone prepared for that? When you die, you're going to be absolutely grilled at heaven's gates with these questions. I would hope that these are good reflections, and that even if you're like, actually, no, I had no time to start a family, or you know what, I was a bit of a crook in business, truth be told, or no, I was very despairing all my life. I'm hoping, and again, I'm being a bit flippant because in Judaism we don't really have a heaven or a hell, but there's this rigorous self-examination that, again, just so you know, this isn't scientifically proven. So Rava had no idea if this was the case. But what this text teaches is that the rabbis really wanted this to be the case. And again, it emphasizes the primacy of the question. And notice what the last question is. The last question is, did you question? So did you spend your life thinking? Were you critical? Were you wise? Did you try? And again, the last one is going to hit you, because just anything that's your last thing, you might remember the most. It will stand out in your brain with freshness. So this poor person has to think. And by the way, this ties into our first Douglas Adams skit that we read. I say skit because it started off as a radio program with different people doing the voices, so it became a book later. But the Douglas Adams question of what's the question of life, the universe, and everything? We don't know the questions. The rabbis may have tried to find out what the questions to life, the universe, and everything were. Because, again, if it's at the end of your life, you're looking back at your life. And then if the questions could be, at least Rava, I think is in some ways responding to Douglas Adams, is suggesting, all right, great, the answer could be 42, but the questions are, did you make time for your family? Whatever your family looks like. We're not necessarily talking anything particular, but was there time, that you weren't just doing business? But also when you did business, did you put goodness into the world? Or were you a cheat? Were you mean? Did you hurt other people? Because business really is the public. It's how you interact with others. And it's so easy to manipulate and to take. But what we're really saying is, were you ethical? Were you an ethical person outside your home? And again, family, that's inside your home. Were you a good person inside your home as well? Were you nice? And yeah, did you find time for Torah? The 70 faces of Torah. So, and again, were you hopeful? What do we make of that? Did you keep hope alive? That's incredible. We try. Again, I think there's the acknowledgement there, particularly when the rabbis lived. Life can be so bitter, so unlike wine, so scary. Persecution, poverty, death, disease. It's terrifying every moment. And as Jews, we actually emphasize hope and happiness. Not necessarily happiness, but redemption. And again, the Hebrew or the Aramaic uses the word redemption. Did you hope for there to be a better future? And that's an incredible question to ask as well. And then again, and did you question? Were you interesting and thoughtful? And again, that could be that's our answer to life, the universe, and everything. Susie. The link, I'm going to say that out loud in case anyone missed that gem, and I love Zissel too much, it's incredible. Perhaps the link between wine and secrets is that if enough wine goes in, the secrets come out. And it's actually true. Like, yes, people actually make that comparison. There's a source that I've read about that. Thank you, blessed Zissel. Oh, really? Oh, perfect. Exactly. So again, Zissel predicted that. It's incredible stuff. But yes, I just love as well that, and again, in other theologies, when you die, you're then judged. Other people question you. They're like, and someone else, like the angel or the devil or God says, were you bad, were you good? Here you go, there you go. Maybe you get reincarnated. But here, the person is asked. And again, that just screams Jewish, doesn't it? It just screams that you have to be thoughtful and question and be discerning, and you get to judge yourself and others don't get to judge you. It's actually quite refreshing. So again, the primacy of questioning. There's a couple of thoughts now, of sayings, because we've looked at some really ancient texts, but I wanted to get more to some 20th century, just to have some takes on, again, why questioning could be so powerful and important. So that bottom text is from Terry Hake, who founded and he directed Teach Thought. So I'm very bored of my own voice. Would someone like to read this? And I can bring the mic to them, or they can come up. Joel.
Questions are more important than answers because questions seek to understand, to clarify and frame and evaluate, while answers, at their best, are temporary responses whose relative quality can decay over time, needing to be reformed and remade and reevaluated as the world itself changes. Questioning is the art of learning. Learning to ask important questions is the best evidence of understanding there is, far surpassing the temporary endorphins of a correct answer.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comments on that or questions on that?
Yes, a number of years ago, I went to a play in New York called On Wednesday It Rained. The first half of the play was the children of two couples coming together and looking at all of their parents' things and deciding how their lives were and how everything was not the way they thought it was. The second half was going back in time and seeing what the parents actually did, and everything that the kids came up with was wrong.
100%. It's different viewpoints, isn't it? It changes depending to where you are, when you are, how you feel. The answers themselves might not even be truths. Yes, not necessarily. Please.
Okay, so I'm reading about the future of this world with the temperatures changing, and they have a question, think they have an answer. That answer doesn't work on all the time in different countries and in different scientific places. Questions happen, and how do we deal with it? Yes.
In the field of science, which is a discipline that looks for an answer, a concrete answer, because that's what science and mathematics and physics really tries to find. The answer is essential, and it is important to get there, because the answer would be a solution. And one of the problems, though, is that there often aren't obvious solutions. So research and scientists spend their whole lives chasing that answer, because also, even if you find an answer, a new problem can come up anyway, or something can change. Again, you were talking about global warming, let's try this, let's try that. There are things beyond our scope of knowledge and apprehension, which again still puts the question as being more important than the answer, because you have to ask the right question and find the right set of statistics. Right. Exactly. And then we get distracted, so we don't even solve it. So we know what we want the solution to be: a nice world that isn't too hot or isn't too cold, a time that animals don't go extinct, and that humans can be sustainable on planet Earth. But we're not quite sure how to get there. So we try and try and try, but the trying is actually what's important, because it gets us closer and closer. So yes. Yep, new ones come up, and as soon as you answer something, you find another aspect of something else. So even when you're talking about empirical questions and answers, something that, what is 1 + 1? There is an answer to that, unless you're getting into like quantum physics, when it might be too destabilized. But to most of our problems, the solution, the answer is so complicated, and there are so many factors, we can't even figure it out. So really, the emphasis should be on we have to ask the right questions and find the right solutions. Yeah, and we have to keep asking, and even have the same, because some people don't even know that problem exists, so they're not even asking the question, and they're not seeking for the solutions, because they're distracted by their economy, or whatever pressing problem is going on in their life. So yeah, we're wrapping up. I want to make sure that we have time for a coffee break before our next esteemed teacher comes in. The next 3 boxes, actually we're going to flip the page. We're on our final page, page 4. There's just this really, really lovely quote from Isidore Isaac Rabi, who was a Nobel laureate and a Jew, who in an interview said the following: "My mother made me a scientist without ever intending to. Every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn would ask her child after school, 'So, new?' It's definitely new, really. 'New, did you learn anything today?' But not my mother. 'Izzy,' she would say, 'did you ask a good question today?' And that difference, asking good questions, made me become a scientist." So again, that ties into our previous little bit of conversation, that a scientist knows how to ask good questions. So, by the way, that's a beautiful piece of Torah in itself, rather than to emphasize, what did you learn, what answers have you got? What questions did you ask? Manishtana halayla hazeh. The next 3 quotes are again, I just wanted to throw this in, because as a Jewish people, we're known for questioning. We're known for it. And this is, in my head, the spicy quotes, because it's actually about political stability. So one of my favorite rabbis, Rabbi Aaron Alexander, who was a Ziegler school teacher for many, many years, said this once in a sermon: questions tend to democratize. Autocrats hate questions. We train children at the Passover Seder to ask why. Because, and listen to this, tyrants are undone, and liberty is won with a good question. You can't have a revolution or social change if people don't question the status quo. It's not until a bunch of people say, can this be different? I don't want this to be the same. And they question the authority of that leader. Is that leader corrupt? Could we change? Would you join my cause? Because if you're not asking that, then you're silent and you're accepting reality. When you question, you're challenging reality. And when other people question too, that's dissent and revolution. And that becomes democracy, because again, it's the powerful act of challenging someone. I don't know if you're a good leader. I don't know if you're right. Or forcing them to justify themselves. Tell me why. I need to know why. I need to question your answer. And that is what helps destabilize autocracies. And as you'll notice, when a tyrant sits, when a despot sits atop, the first thing that goes is the press and freedom of speech and other parties. So when you have, that's the whole point. When you have more than one party, it becomes a democratic system. Even if it's somewhat corrupt and there's only really two options, it's still in principle the ability, because that's what they do, of one team asks the other team, really? Is that how you're going to build the economy? Really? Student loans? Really? And you're asking questions. Defend yourself. Make it better. And you're arguing, and there's differences. And that's a society that's healthier than a society where no questions are allowed, because there is only one way, only one face. When you have 70 faces, you have to, which face is going to win? Or are they all going to kind of exist at the same time in this wonderful bubbling dispute of openness and diversity?
Okay. You also have to ask the revolutionaries, the people who want to change things, is it a good idea? Why on earth do you want to do this? Why do you want to destabilize? Is it going to make life better for everybody? There's a zillion questions for those people too.
100%, thank you. The revolutionaries need to be questioned themselves by the peasants, by other people. They need to justify themselves, because they may well be coming to set up an even more horrible system in place. They need to write books, manifestos, hold discussions, and political events, because even worse things often do tend to happen. But the principle is there. And that's why, by the way, it's very tough to have a society that allows for questions. Another word for that is pluralism, right? The ability for there to be dissenting interpretations on how to live life and how to be. Nadia.
I just want various absurdity. When I lived under the communism, we had elections, and everybody was expected or forced to participate in those elections, but there was nothing to elect. There was just one set of candidates, and you said yes or not. You didn't have any other choice.
And I'm so sorry. A lot of our friends who are living in places that are less democratic than certain other places have unfortunately experienced shows of democracy that aren't real. The thought of having to make your people go through an election because then it looks and feels like democracy, but it actually isn't. It's scary. And again, I don't want to dwell too long in dark, dark places, but I found an incredible quote from Primo Levi when literally, surviving the Holocaust a few years later, talks about monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries ready to believe and act without questioning. Because again, when we're talking about the power of the question and what is evil in this world, those monsters are actually quite radical thinkers, and they've questioned, and they're exuding power, but they can't get huge-scale atrocities done. It's the masses who let that, who don't question. And again, we don't need to get too deeply into like, were those people truly evil, or were they just frightened? Because a lot of them were doing it out of fear. But the principle, I think, definitely remains. You know, that many, many people let bad things happen because we don't even have we don't have the courage or the knowledge to necessarily question those orders. And again, if everyone is taught to deeply question and question each other, things don't spiral to such dark places as when people who have been raised to be obedient. Obedience is, in Judaism, not a good thing unless it's to God. Because, we need to be obedient to God. However, it's so open as to what God even wants. Because again, there's no like one answer. But again, we also understand ethics and morals, etc., etc. I know we just got to quite a like philosophical place of bigness and depth. And I'm so sorry because I know I'm seeing, I don't want to ever suppress people's questions because people are like, but it is like 6 minutes to 11. Is it okay if I just add one final source and then I'll step back and people can comment and we can ask other questions? Is that okay? Just for the sake of closure. And again, I skipped over the Nikita Khrushchev. I don't like Jews because they ask why, you know. But again, that's quite a famous saying from them. And then just a little, you know, wisdom causes us grief. So it is tough to be in the questions. But yes, I wanted just to end with Shavuot because we started with Pesach and how central questioning is. And now we get why. Because when you question, that's freedom. Freedom to question, freedom to say, I choose not to. Freedom to dissent from the popular opinion. And Shavuot is really, in its own way, not that we do questioning for Shavuot, but if we think about it, what's one of the big mitzvahs aside from eating dairy that we're told to do and engage in on Shavuot? Study, study, study Torah. What really is studying Torah? It's questioning, thank you. It's asking questions. It's, what interests me about this story? Why did that happen? What does this word mean? How does it impact the Jewish people or my life? So there's just this lovely quote from Stephen Greenberg, Wrestling with God and Man. God loves it when we ask why. When we ask good questions, the Torah is given anew at Sinai at that very moment. Again, that's such a Shavuot image. Anytime you ask a good question, which is why I'm going to end on your questions, Sinai happens. It's as if God is saying, here's the Torah, here's a face, here's another face of the Torah, here's another face for you, because you'll see it differently than Gary. It's that we get eternal Shavuot happens whenever we question, which means even on Pesach, we're inviting Shavuot into the Seder table experience, because whenever we question, God is happy. And again, what an incredible thing that we imagine that our God loves our questions and nudges us all the time. So let's end on some questions. And again, no pressure, but if it's a good question, then Sinai will happen right now in this room. So, I think whose hand did it happen first? Gary's got a pressing need.
All I wanted to say is that in today's world order, there are autocrats who crush all questioning. There are no questions because they disappear.
Need to make sure questions aren't allowed, and you have to encourage a society of telling on your neighbor, you know, and if there's any dissent, if there's any questions, if there's any hint of an uprising, because what is an uprising if it isn't I'm questioning my orders, I'm questioning the authority? An effective autocrat will just ensure that people can't be allowed to do that, which is why, again, as Primo Levi would say, these people aren't monsters. The people who don't question, they're not monsters, they're ordinary people, and it's not always their fault. They're protecting their lives, their families, their babies. But yes, that's a truly despotic and terrible world. So we have to always allow the questions to happen. And again, that's why even in my darkest moments, when I feared for America, I still feel, well, at least we do have the press, and there is dissent, and there's parody, by the way. There's so much comedy of people mocking the leadership. And that's actually questioning. That's calling into question the character of the person. You know, is that person fit to lead? Let's make fun of them. Let's challenge them. Let's put a little bit of destabilization in that party or that person. And the fact that there's such a healthy comedy of the other in this country, and that hasn't been banned. It should be. But that means that we do have a healthy culture of questioning in America. Could be better, and again, no judgment. But.
Minor correction, the name of the play was 3 Days of Rain, starring Julia Roberts.
3 Days of Rain. This is a play I'd love to see. 3 Days of Rain, a national treasure that was on Broadway. Any other parting shots before we have a little break and continuation of learning? Rosie, create Sinai for us, please.
No, I'm really into science, and what I want to say, I want to get back to the original text that, we read in terms of the computer answering the question or trying to answer the question. But with me, and Gary would attest to this, I was always into astronomy, and I still am. And what I learned over time, because I was always asking the question, well, what is out there? What is the beginning? What is it we're about? And what I learned is that the more you learn about the universe, the more questions you ask. And that's the central point, question. And I remember one thing, years and years ago, Ted Koppel, I don't know if you remember who he is, because he's now retired. Who knows where he is now? But he asked a question, when scientists first came out with this Big Bang theory, his question was, what happened before the Big Bang?
And why did it start, and who started it? Toda Rabba. We're going to end on that because that was such an epic question of literally, that's the universe itself. Even when you find an answer of, we can notice that objects are moving further and further and further apart, we still get to say, but why? What happened before that? Who caused it? What does it mean? And there's a new question behind an answer. So science doesn't kill mystery, and it doesn't kill faith. It actually enhances it because you get to a deeper place. That's amazing. I wish I'd been there. So thank you, Toda Rabba. Thank you so much for letting me teach and for letting me question. Please have a quick break. Thank you, Zissel, for being online but contributing just as much as if you were here. And I'm so sorry that I didn't give you a big enough time slot for a break because I respect so much our wonderful Rise Rabbi who is coming up next. Oh, you're so welcome. So welcome. It's so good to see you again. You're welcome to keep the sheets or I'll take them back. Do beautiful things to them.
Good morning.
Good.
Oh my gosh. That's okay. That's wonderful.
You know what? 2 weeks, okay? You can spend 2 months in Japan. So much to see.
Sounds beautiful.
By the
Yeah.
time I'm done, I'm going to be templed out.
I'm sure. I am sure. I'm sure you will be. There's a lot of beautiful Shinto shrines everywhere.
But food. Yes, I know one thing.
There you go.
Subway. I'm like Charlie. Did you ever return?
Yeah. You better make sure you get back. Sure.
Nothing else?
Uh-huh.
Always keep the card in your pocket. The hotel. Taxi, whatever it costs, will take.
That's a good idea. Good idea. All right, everyone, shall we get started? Remember, we left off last week with the Treaty of Versailles, and that sets up so much drama right afterwards that we need to talk about that. So, if you'll recall, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 ends World War I. And what did we say about this specific treaty? What we said was that the Allies came together and dictated to Germany the terms of the treaty, right? And what were the terms of the treaty? Germany was forced to sign this treaty. They were forced to accept responsibility. They were forced to disarm. They were forced to cede territory. And most importantly for our discussion, they were forced to pay reparations. Everything that they had destroyed, they had to pay to fix. How did Germany pay for everything to be fixed? They printed money. You're right. They printed money. Now, what that means is if you just print money and there's nothing to back the money up, then the money's worthless. So what ended up happening is Germany went through a period of hyperinflation. And hyperinflation means like a loaf of bread would cost $20,000, literally, because the dollar just wasn't worth anything. Okay, this caused a huge economic collapse in Germany. From 1919, right after the First World War, to 1933, which is Hitler's ascent, Germany, the government of Germany is called the Weimar Republic. Weimar because that's a city in Germany where the terms were decided. And it was a republic. It was a democratic republic which had a president. Anyone know the president's name? Very famous name. Hindenburg. Very good. President Hindenburg. Yes. And he caused the Weimar Republic and the German states to join the League of Nations in 1926. But there was a lot of resentment among Germans for having signed the Treaty of Versailles. Why? Because the German people were absolutely humiliated. They were absolutely demoralized. You know, they were shown very quickly at the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, you folks lost. You were bad. You caused this whole thing. And now you're going to pay for it, all of you. You're going to pay for all the damage you did because you were terrible in what you did. You attacked them. And you were horrible people. And so now you're going to pay for everything because of the destruction that you did, you bad people. Okay, this is right now how you're feeling. This is how the German people felt times 100. So, between 1919 and 1933, think about that period in the United States, 1928, 1929, what's going on? The Great Depression here in the United States. And you can absolutely believe that the Great Depression, which happens here in the United States, has global repercussions, for sure. Worldwide depression in 1929. Just before that time, what did we have? We had the Roaring '20s. Things were good. People were happy. Everyone was dancing. You know, life was good. Everything's wonderful. And then, bam, 1928, 1929 happens. The stock market collapses, and the world goes into a depression. In Germany, there is high unemployment. There's social and political unrest. It's always the government's fault. It's always the leader of the government's fault. And what ends up happening is you have a very charismatic figure. Charismatic means he endears himself to the people. And he rises up, and of course we know his name is Hitler. And in 1933, Hindenburg appoints him as the Chancellor of Germany. And that begins all hell. So now let's go back, now that we know sort of what happened after World War I, leading up to Hitler's appointment. Now let's go back and look at Hitler's life, because now we can understand how this happened. I mean, I think without trivializing it, I think we all understand what happens during World War II to our people. We've all seen enough footage. We've all heard it. There aren't words. There just aren't words. I don't even know how to imagine that kind of horror. But let's try to understand how Europe got there, how Germany got there. So Hitler is born in 1889, and he's born in Austria-Hungary. He moves to Vienna, Austria, when he is 18 years old. And he applies for acceptance to the Vienna Academy of Art, from which he is denied acceptance. Following that, he tries to go for the Vienna School of Architecture. And that didn't happen either. And from 1909, 2 years after he moves to Vienna, to 1913, he is struggling in Vienna. But he's attending lots of political meetings. He is involved in lots of political causes. And he is learning about the ins and outs of politics. Something very, very important happens during his early time in Vienna. He watches the mayor of Vienna, Karl Lueger, who is the mayor from 1897 to 1910. So from 1907, when Hitler moves there, to 1910, 3 years, he is watching Karl Lueger as the mayor. And Karl Lueger gets re-elected a number of times. How does Karl Lueger get re-elected a number of times? He runs on a nationalist, anti-Semitic platform. In other words, he gets the people behind a scapegoat to unite all the people in the belief that somebody is bad, somebody else is responsible for everything that's happening. And he runs on a nationalist platform. Germans are strong. Germans are good. Remember that World War I had not started yet. 1909 to 1913 is when Hitler is struggling in Vienna. Karl Lueger ends his mayorship in 1910. Okay, so for those early years, it's a nationalistic platform and it's an anti-Semitic platform. The Jews are bad. We all agree on that. And he gets reelected over and over and over. And that does not go by Hitler. He sees that very, very clearly, that it works. In 1913, he moves to Munich because there is basically forced military service in Munich. I mean, in Austria-Hungary and Vienna. He moves to Munich to avoid military service. 1914, World War I is just beginning to get started, right? And Hitler volunteers in Germany for the German army. Why? It kind of doesn't make sense. He leaves Vienna to avoid military service, and then he enlists in the German military. Well, what things had changed between then? World War I had broken out, and so there was a nationalist cause for him to fight, for the glorification of Germany. So he volunteers in the German army, and he rises to the rank of corporal. Okay, and corporal is not high, but it's definitely somewhere in the middle. So he has command over people, and he is honing his skills of how to manage people. 1919 comes, and we know 1919 is the end of World War I. After the war, he is appointed to an intelligence and propaganda unit within the army. within the intelligence and propaganda unit, he learns how to make speeches. He learns how to exploit German nationalism. He has there's a lot of political training that was involved, and so what happens is he ends up joining the German Workers' Party. The German Workers' Party. Now, again, we have to keep in mind what's going on in 1919. The German people are humiliated. They are embarrassed. They feel horrible about themselves. The country is broken. They are broken. Okay, when you are in that situation, when you are humiliated, embarrassed, and broken, what are you looking for? You're looking for someone to tell you you're wonderful. No, they're wrong. You're wonderful, right? You're looking for someone to build you up, to prop you up, to make you feel good about yourself. Hitler understood that very, very clearly, which is why I say charismatic. We usually think of charisma as a very positive trait. Oh, he has or she has a lot of charisma, right? I don't want to give him a positive trait, but it's the correct word. When he was in front of people, he got their attention, and he endeared himself to people, and he made the people feel good. He was a great orator. Yes, he understood, as much as we despise this man, he was really good at what he did. He was, and we all understand that. Because he, in the government at this point, in the intelligence and propaganda, he's making speeches, he is in charge of publicity. And he starts himself off in the 1920s, he starts himself off with an anti-communist and anti-Semitic platform. He starts publishing things anti-communist and anti-Semitic. He changes the party name from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. National Socialist, Nationale Socialista, Nazi for short. He changes the name of the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and it becomes a party that runs on an anti-communist and anti-Semitic platform. In 1921, so he changes the name in 1920. In 1921, he becomes the leader of that party. In 1923, he organizes that party to try to overthrow the government in Bavaria. Bavaria is southern Germany. To overthrow the government in Bavaria at the time. It has a very famous name. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch. Putsch meaning rebellion, revolt, insurrection. And the reason it's called that is because the National Socialist German Workers' Party held their meetings in the close-by beer hall. And so they march outside of government, and it is an attempt to overthrow the government. What ends up happening is they get captured. And Hitler is sentenced to 5 years in prison. He ends up only serving 9 months in prison. Sounds like the US, Gary says. Yeah, he only serves 9 months. But something very important happens while he is in prison, which is he writes Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, my struggle, which is obviously this very, very, very important book for the Nazi regime and outlining his ideology. So he writes Mein Kampf. In 1925, he gets out of prison and he refounds the Nazi Party. Remember, they had all been captured, they were all sentenced, there was no Nazi Party going on. He comes back and refounds it. By 1930, the Nazi Party increases representatives in the government from 14 to 107. They become the second largest party in Germany. Okay, do we understand how this happens now? He is appealing to the people. He's telling them what they want to hear, and he's creating someone for them to hate and unify behind the people to hate. And he is standing up there in a very strong manner, with a very strong voice, proclaiming that we are Germans. We are descendants of Nordic kings and gods. We are not these humiliated little people that they told us we are. That's ridiculous. We're not that. We are descendants of the great Nordic people and descendants back again. We are going to feel good about ourselves again. And you need to elect me to do that. We know the people rallied behind him in a very significant way. In 1932, he becomes a German citizen. So remember, he was born in Austria-Hungary, so he was an Austria-Hungarian citizen. He becomes a German citizen in 1932. What does that allow him to do? It allows him to run for office against Hindenburg. Right? So, remember, we talked just a minute ago that that the Weimar Republic exists 1919 to 1933. In 1933, he becomes chancellor of the coalition government. He runs against Hindenburg, and he doesn't have it's not a resounding win, but he gets a plurality of votes. And so he gets in. And he becomes chancellor of the coalition government. Coalition government because he didn't get a vast majority of votes. He had to form a coalition government, much like Israel has to do today. Israel has all these problems because they have to try to cater to everybody to try to get them to have enough seats to form it, and it's a mess. But that's how it is. So he becomes chancellor of the coalition government, and the Nazis now have 1/3 of the seats in the government. That's a lot. That's a lot of influence. In 1933, the seat of the government, called the Reichstag, is destroyed by fire, and that creates the need for a general election. Was the fire set deliberately? They couldn't prove it. Probably yes. And what that does is it forces a general election into play. And so Hitler is now chancellor. And what do you think his aspirations are? What are his plans? What are his goals? Yeah, kind of. Eileen says he wants to be king. Yeah, kind of. He wants total control over everything. As chancellor, he's only head of the government, right? He wants to be a dictator. Ilse? He used his fire in the Reichstag against the campaign against communists. Very good. Hitler becomes a virtual dictator. The Nazi Party is the only party that is permitted in Germany, so he wipes out all ability to belong to anybody else. You have to belong to the Nazi Party. He withdraws from the League of Nations, which the League of Nations, as many of you know, is the precursor to the United Nations, right? It was the first attempt at something like a United Nations. Woodrow Wilson, yes. Both of which, the League of Nations and the UN, are fantastic intellectual ideas. But in practice, very little power to do anything about anything. It's really a shame. The US didn't join. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Ken said the US didn't join it because Woodrow Wilson failed to get the country behind him. Your father was born in Chicago in 1900. And in 1932 or 33, as a young physician, he went to a medical convention in Berlin and went to this humongous meeting where Hitler was speaking. He said he had never seen a crowd like that in his life. That was a story that was told to them as little kids. The power of being told that you are in fact not bad, that you are descended from greatness, and that your future is towards greatness is very, very powerful. So he withdraws from the League of Nations, and he increases the army by 3 times the size. That was prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Versailles said Germany could not rearm and could not have a large military. So, Hitler very slyly starts by increasing the size of the military. He is not rearming the military in a huge way, but he is increasing the number of people in the military. How is he doing that? Military conscription. You have to serve in the army. Yes. What do you think, Ken? Where did Germany get the money to do all this? Printing presses. They were printing the money, yes. Still, the money was still basically worthless, but they were beginning by 1934 for sure. They were beginning to come out of a depression. You know, one of the fastest ways to get out of a depression is military buildup. Yes, and that's exactly what happened with the United States as well, right? Great Depression, 1928-29. World War II. All of a sudden, manufacturing has to get going. Everybody's got to build weapons. They've got to build machinery. They've got to build all the things that go into waging a war. As soon as manufacturing starts taking off like that, a country rebuilds itself economically. And Germany did the same thing. Look, we can say, I mean, there aren't enough horrible adjectives to apply to this man. But he was smart. He was smart in the sense that he knew how to get the country moving, and he knew how to get the people behind him. That's the only compliment I'll ever give him. And it was disastrous. We have the same, Ken says we have the same situation in Ukraine now with the whole world. Tell me about that. We're providing Ukraine with weapons, and all of NATO is doing the same. And finding that we are in fact shorthanded and building more weapons. Yes, you can see every night if you turn on the TV, NATO countries, as well as we understand now, it came out the other day, that there's a coalition of countries that are secretly funding Kiev and the Ukraine and sending them all kinds of weapons. And what they have found is that they're depleting their own weapons, clearly. And we are too. And so manufacturing is going to have to ramp up, and it's going to have to ramp up all throughout NATO countries as well. That's going to be good ultimately for the European economy and for our economy. It is going to be a good thing when manufacturing ramps up again. Okay. So he increases the army by 3 times the size. What do you think the Allied powers are thinking now? I think what the Allies are thinking at this time, because he is a virtual dictator, but he's not a dictator quite yet. There is still opposition to him within the Nazi Party. And he's only increasing the manpower of the army. So I think the Allied powers at this time are saying, oh, we better keep an eye on this. We better keep an eye on this. And they were a little worried about him, right? They were a little worried that he commanded, the footage from his rallies, we saw that. Our government saw that. And they were, I think, a little surprised, a little alarmed, a lot alarmed at the loyalty that he commanded. And also part of the problem is the whole world was tired of war. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so nobody wanted to rush in again and attack and start another war. World War I, we all of us understand the brutality of World War II. Sometimes what we fail to forget is that World War I was incredibly brutal, incredibly brutal. So many people died. There weren't advanced weaponry. And even before World War I, if you want to know, our Civil War in the United States, oh my God, people just died and died and died. There was so much death during our Civil War. And World War I was a horrendous, horrendous war. More people, Solana says, more people killed in our Civil War than all the other wars put together. Yes. Yes. They were Americans. Yes. Yes. Both sides were our sides. Ken? The other thing that Ken says is that Hitler was secretly building an air force. Very good. One of the things that Hitler did was he recruited the very best and brightest scientists within Germany that he could get. And these German scientists, they were good. And they started, and they really started to move the war machinery forward, inventing and designing new weapons, inventing and designing new ways to use the weapons that they had. So 1934 comes along. Hindenburg is out. Hitler has been Chancellor of Germany for about a year. He has some opposition within his party, but he pretty much enjoys the fruits of what he says goes. In 1934, we have an event that's very important. It's called the Night of the Long Knives. The Night of the Long Knives. And what happens here? Hitler crushes all the opposition within his party. He takes out anybody who opposed him. And so what does that leave him? That leaves him as the supreme leader of the Nazi Party with nobody at all to challenge him in any way, shape, or form. He becomes the Führer at that point. And he abolishes the presidency. He becomes the Führer and what's called the Reich Chancellor, the supreme leader, and nobody dares question him. And he surrounds himself, obviously, with only people who have his back everywhere and who support him 100% and who will tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Yes. I mean, dictators they follow a very similar path. Gary said it sounds like Putin today. Yes, dictators follow a very similar path. Rise to the top, get rid of anybody who could possibly challenge you, and then decide what you want to do and surround yourself with a small group of loyalists. Yes. Because everybody else was afraid. Yes, the United States and the other allies were watching this happen, but nobody wanted to go back to war. And I think everybody thought, well, as long as this guy doesn't cause any more problems, we'll let him get away with this. We'll let him do that. Gary. Good, very good. So Gary says the period between the two wars was a period of isolationism, and the United States was definitely a part of it. Look, we're gonna become insular. We're gonna take care of ourselves. We don't want to get involved again in another war. We don't want that. We're just gonna work on ourselves now. And in 1935, Hitler rearms the German army. That's a big deal. And the reason for him to rearm that is because he wants to undo the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. That's why I made such a big deal about the Treaty of Versailles the last 2 weeks and how it humiliated the people, because that's Hitler's goal. He wants to undo all of the things that were required of Germany from the Treaty of Versailles. And military conscription is very strongly enforced. In 1930, yes, Lana. Very nice, very nice. And he's going to learn this lesson over and over again. Lana says if nobody stopped him from rearming his army, then he learned very quickly that he could do anything he wanted and nobody's going to step in to stop him. This is super important. And you'll see about that in, let's see, maybe 3 minutes. Okay. In 1938, Neville Chamberlain meets with Hitler. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, meets with Hitler. And Britain, France, and Italy sign the Munich Agreement. What happens in the Munich Agreement? They agree that Germany gets a few more lands from the south that had been taken away and were a part of Czechoslovakia. In the Sudetenland. So those countries gave him land. where many ethnic Germans lived. Now, this happens all the time in modern times. We see, even in the east of Ukraine, right? Russians are trying to take the very eastern part of Ukraine. There are a lot of Russians who lived, and Russian-speaking people who lived in the east of Ukraine. It's in Ukraine, but there are a lot of Russians there. And so the idea of taking back territory where the predominant population is not the population of the country that owns it. And Russia took over Crimea. Yes. And that had a large number of Russian people speaking in it, living in it. Putin took it, and the world did nothing. The same exact situation that Hitler is now understanding. The same lesson. Yes, one more. Okay, so Chamberlain signed it and said, we are signing for peace in our time. So they gave in order to appease Hitler. Yes. Correct. So very good point. So at the same time that this is happening, and Hitler has been consolidating power and rearming himself, Joette points out that in 1935 we have the Nuremberg laws. So we have really the beginning of defining Jews in what way? Negative, for sure. But how is non-citizens not allowed to participate in the public sphere? Well, the word I was looking for was defining them racially. Defining them racially, right? It depends on what kind of blood do you have? Were any of your ancestors Jewish? One Jewish grandparent. And so then you have Jewish blood and you are defined as a Jew. All right. And in 1938, Chamberlain comes, and then what happens? We have the Anschluss in Austria. Germany invades Austria and just takes it. What happens at the end of 1938? Kristallnacht. And so we see the pattern that is happening, and the Allies saw what was happening too. Now we have a problem. We got a big problem. In 1939, Hitler signs a peace treaty with Russia. That's interesting. He signs a peace treaty with Russia. Why is it interesting? Because he's going to break that treaty and invade them. Hitler then invades Poland, and he takes it over on September 1st. And he divides the country between Germany and Russia. Russia gets half of Poland, the eastern half of Poland. Germany gets the western half of Poland. This particular event was hugely important to our people. Why? Because the largest population of Jews in Europe lived in Poland. By far, Poland had the most Jews of any country in Europe. Up until Germany invades Poland, Germany had been trying to figure out, what are we doing with these Jews? The first idea, very clearly, was, you know what? Let's make life so difficult for them that they leave. That was the first thought. Let's just make life so miserable for them that they all leave. The Jews of Germany, assimilated Jews who felt they were Germans first and Jews second, all thought, this is bad right now, but this guy won't be here forever. We'll get over it. Everything will be fine. We just have to tough this out. By Kristallnacht, it was very clear that wasn't going to happen. And by Kristallnacht, everybody knew, holy, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. And once Hitler invades Poland, what happens? He he absorbs millions of Jews. And now the problem becomes really big for Hitler in his mind. What am I going to do with 3 million more Jews than we already have? Well, that sets up the mechanisms for what's going to happen next. On September 3rd, France, Britain, Australia declare war. And by this time, they understood, okay, this is bad. They declare war. Between the years 1938 and 1941, we have what's called the Avion Conference. The Avion Conference is a conference of allies in Avion, France. And basically, what this conference was about is to decide, what's the world going to do with all these Jews who want to leave Germany and Eastern Europe? What are we going to do with all these Jews? How many, and all the representatives of all the countries were there, and basically, in a nutshell, what happens is, okay, who's willing to take Jews? How many can you take? How many can you take? How many can you take? How many? Nobody wants to take any Jews? What? Nobody wants to take any Jews? And that was the result. Nobody wants to take any Jews. The State Department of our country at the time, was not, I don't know if it was anti-Semitic, but it was definitely not disposed to helping Jews. Yeah, FDR is, Janice, say that again. FDR was what? Roosevelt did not want to take Jews even after he knew what was happening, and it was forced upon him. Yes, Roosevelt was not overtly anti-Semitic, but he was not particularly, receptive to helping Jews. In his mind, he wanted to get this war over. So when the first pictures came in of the concentration camps, and our government knew what was going on, he decided against bombing the railroads to the concentration camps, because he said, look, we need these bombs to win the war. And if we can get the war over faster, this problem will get taken care of. Lana says, and if they bomb the railroad tracks, they're just going to rebuild them, so it was an effective answer anyway. Okay, so the Avion Conference comes in. Nobody wants to accept refugees, Jewish refugees, into their country. Great Britain enacts the White Paper in 1939, severely restricting Jewish immigration to Palestine, because by this time, clearly, after World War I, Palestine is under a British mandate, right? Great Britain is running Palestine. And so Great Britain restricts immigration to Palestine. Why? Because they didn't want to upset the Arabs. Mufti had already met with Hitler. German army. There was an alliance between the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and Hitler, and Great Britain didn't want to upset the apple cart in that part of the world, so they said we'll just allow some Jews in. By 1940, the Nazis occupied Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Holland, and France. Of course, in 1941, we have Pearl Harbor. But in 1941, that's another really horrific date, because the first concentration camp that opens, Chelmno, in 1941, these are attempts at how to exterminate people. And the first attempts were done using carbon monoxide. But they found that carbon monoxide was not a very efficient killer. It didn't kill enough people quickly enough. So they started experimenting and ultimately settled on Zyklon B gas, which killed very quickly. In 1942, Hitler tears up the peace treaty and invades Russia. The name of that invasion was called Operation Barbarossa. In 1942, we have the Wannsee Conference, W-A-N-S-E-E. That's the conference in Wannsee, Germany. And the long and short of it is, that's where the final solution was planned. That's where Eichmann proposed what they're going to do. Why? Because they had all these Jews within their territory, so many that they had that they had absorbed from Poland. And what Hitler saw very quickly from the Avion Conference, nobody wanted Jews. And what that told him was, I can do anything I want to them. No one's going to care because nobody cares about them. Nobody wants to take them in. No one cares about them, so I can do whatever I want to do. And the final solution is basically planned at the Wannsee Conference. 1943, the Germans lose to Russia in the Battle of Stalingrad. The Russian winter stopped the German army in their tracks. They should have learned from Napoleon, because the same thing happened to Napoleon. Exactly. They should have learned from Napoleon. In 1944, there was an assassination attempt on Hitler's life, which obviously did not kill him. But by 1945, the Soviet troops enter Germany, and Hitler commits suicide. The anniversary of his committing suicide was just a couple of days ago, actually. And so I don't think, I really don't think it's necessary for us to go through the various concentration camps and who did what where. I mean, it's just, I don't think anybody wants to hear that, and we all understand what happened. Starting with Chelmno in 1941, and then everything just got worse after that. And we all understand that. But this is how Hitler was able to rise to power and become Führer. Okay. Yes, Joette. Good. So Joette says he appeared smart in the beginning, but as the war on, W-A-R and then W-O-R-E, war on, he became much more desperate. And rather than using his firepower to kill the enemy, he trained it back on the Jews to eliminate as many Jews as possible before the end would come. Yes, Janice. So Janice says by 1942 she read that Hitler pretty much knew the end was coming, especially after the United States entered. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it is, I mean, perhaps they have some information that we weren't privy to. I think he still thought that he could win. At the end of the war, he also conscripted children. So there is conjecture. There is a belief that had he not tried to invade Russia, that the Allies would not have won the war. I think there are arguments to be made in favor of that idea, as well as many arguments to be made against that idea. But certainly, I mean, it's an interesting kind of proposition. They lost a lot of military power and they lost a lot of manpower during the march eastward to Russia. Lots. And it's conceivable that that manpower and that firepower could have, I mean, that's one argument for that. However, it would have prolonged the war, Gary says. So the question is, if at the end of World War I, the Allies had taken a different stance, like they did after World War II, and tried to rebuild Germany rather than punish them, if things would have been different. I think very conceivably they would have been different. I mean, there's so much hinges on the state of mind of the German people after World War II, after World War I. So much that allows Hitler's rise to power. Sure. Yes, historians agree that the roots of World War II were in the Treaty of Versailles. Yes. Rosie. Okay, yes. So next week I'll go to, okay, what's going on with Jews right now in Germany? And so we'll end on a positive note for Germany. Yes, absolutely, no problem. Yes.
My husband was 4 years old in 1933 when the election came, and he used to tell the story that his parents took him with them to vote, and he observed them voting. And the day after the election, there were pictures in the paper of everyone who voted against Hitler. This is a story my husband told. I have no reason to question it. On my side of the family, my family was in Austria at the Anschluss. In March of 1938, my mother and father were living in Linz. My mother's comment was that the Austrians welcomed the Anschluss with open arms. They were more anti-Semitic than the Germans, and my mother, may she rest in peace, refused to go back to the continent. And certainly, I mean, she never went to the continent, but her comment about Austria was she didn't know whose face she should spit into, because that was their experience.
Okay, one more, and then we'll end.
Simon Wiesenthal's book about hunting for the Nazis, he said that after World War II and the bringing the Nazis to task who were involved in the concentration camps, the Austrians let them go. The Germans came down much harder on the offenders. And by the way, most of the people in the camp, SS in the camps, were Austrians.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, have a beautiful week. I'll see you next week.
Really anti.
When do you leave for Japan?
May 31st.
Oh, May 30th. And when does this class end?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Rosalie, when does this class end? May 19th. Okay, thank you.